this. Oh, too bad, but it was a fun. If you need to move them to accommodate, if you have a group of 3 or 4, you can move them together to form one. All right, friends, Gamar Chatima Tova, which means may you finish the holiday with a good sealing, like being sealed in the book of life. Tonight is Kol Nidre, Erev Yom Kippur, the most famous part being the Kol Nidre itself, where we annul our vows for the year. But before we sing the prayer, Aldon Cohen, member of our congregation, more than just a member, he is actually the not editor, but the arranger, the one who puts together, does all the layout for the Omer. So we greatly, greatly appreciate that. And he also is a professional musician who plays with the Oakland Symphony, among other places. He's going to play an arrangement of Kol Nidre before it is sung by Chazanit Yael Krieger. If you wish to get to the page already, you certainly, in terms of where Kol Nidre takes place, it is on page 205, but you can also just sit back and listen, contemplate the many things that we've done, that we need to be forgiven for, that we may have done to others, the ways we need to forgive ourselves, and anything else as Aldon Cohen plays. One other thing I forgot. Some of you are wearing talit. That is correct. There are 2 nights where you wear talit in traditional Judaism. They are Kol Nidre and Simchat Torah, and that's because we take out the Sifrei Torah on these nights. So Aldon, thank you so much.
Yasher Koach. We're going to take a second to just rearrange a few things. Thank you so much, Aldon, for setting the mood so beautifully and such a beautiful arrangement of Kol Nidre. Master of the universe, is there a person anywhere who never sins? I am but flesh and blood, often yielding to temptation. I am human, often torn by conflicts. I come to you on this Yom Kippur, this Day of Atonement, and have taken on myself the mitzvah not to eat or drink, not to bathe or perfume myself, not to wear leather shoes or engage in acts of physical intimacy, and to stop all work in order to devote this day to asking forgiveness for the misuse of your gifts during this past year, and to learn once again the holiness of the body, and I would add, the holiness of the soul. Now going to invite you to please rise. We're going to invite our president, David Goodwin, and the one past president who is here, Sandy Margolin. They're going to hold the two Torah scrolls. New members, Paula and Sandy, if you come up to the ark, you're going to open it. And normally this is a big ritual with all the past presidents, and because of the limited space, and they more than anyone know to try to include as many people as we can, they decided not to necessarily sign up for this particular service. But in honor of all those past presidents, I'm not going to name them all because I will leave a couple out. I could probably do it, but I'm guessing I'd leave one out and I'd be in big trouble. So I just want to thank all those presidents who have served this community so
so beautifully and with such hard work and dedication. Thank you for your service. And go ahead and open the ark. It's for later. We're on page 204.
בשיבה של מעלה ובשיבה של מטה על דעת המקום ועל דעת הקהל אנו מתירים להתפלל עם עבריינים בשיבה של מעלה ובשיבה של מטה על דעת המקום ועל דעת הקהל אנו מתירים להתפלל עם עבריינים בשיבה של מעלה ובשיבה של מטה ועל דעת הקהל אנו מתירים להתפלל עם עבריינים. Kol Nidre וחרמי וקונמי וכינויי וכינוסי ושבועות דינדרנה ודהשתבנה ודאחרימנה ודיאסרנה על נפשתנה מיום כיפורים זה עד יום כיפורים הבא עלינו לטובה כל הון איחרתנה והון כל הון יהון שרה טובין לשרירים ולקיימים Sarana la esare Ushevuatana la Shavuot Kol Nidre V'charameh V'konameh V'chinuyeh V'kinuseh Dindana Unehishtabana Udeacharimna V'diasarna al nafshatana miyom kippurim zeh ad yom kippurim haba aleinu letova kulho icharatna vechon kulho Yehon Sharan Shvitin B'telin u'mevutalin la sheririm v'lakayamin nidra Sarana la esare Ushevuatana la Shavuot Kol Nidre V'yasare Vechinu Vekinu say Ushevu Dindarna Udehishtabana Udiacharimna Vidyasana Al Nafshatana Miyom Kippurim Zeh Ad Yom Kippurim Haba Aleinu Haletova Kul hon Icharatna vehon Kul hon Yehon Sharon Shvitin Betelin Mevutalin La Sheririn Vela Kayamin Nidrahana La Nidre Vyasarana La Esare Ushevuatana La Shevut Venislach lechol adat Bnei Yisrael Velager Hagar Betocham Ki lechol ha'am bishkagav V'nislach lechol adat Bnei Yisrael Velager Hagar Betocham Ki lechol ha'am bishkagav V'nislach lechol adat Bnei Yisrael Velager Hagar Betocham Ki lechol ha'am bishkagav Slach na lavon ha'am hazeh Ki בחסדך, וכאשר נסעת לעם הזה, ממצרים ועד הנה, ושם נאמר, ויאמר אדוני סלחתי כדבריך, ויאמר אדוני סלחתי כדבריך, ויאמר אדוני סלחתי כדבריך. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Amen. We remain standing, but the scrolls are now returned to the ark. And we turn to page 207. And this is as big a crowd as we can safely have here, but it just feels really good to see so many of your eyes anyway. And the Baruch Hu, page 207.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed.
May be seated. 207.
Umavir yom umevi laila umavdil ben yom uvein laila Adonai tzvaot shemo el chai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Hamariv Harahavim.
Page 208.
Ahavat olam Beit Yisrael Amcha ahavta Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu v'shochbeinu v'kumeinu nasiach bechukecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed ki hem chayeinu ve'orech yameinu uvahem negeh yomam v'layla ve'vatechal tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך.
We continue silently, 209.
Adonai Elohechem Emet. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים ובני ישראל, לחנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו
210.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף פלא. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לי אלי ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר, כי פד אדוני את יעקב, וגלה מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Page 211, Hashkivenu.
Givenu Adonai. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
Page 212, for on this day atonement shall be made from you to purify you from all your transgressions. In the presence of Adonai you shall be pure. We rise now, Kiva Yom Hazeh, followed by the Chatzi Kaddish, 212.
כי ביום הזה יכפר לכם לטהר אתכם מכל חטאותיכם לפני אדוני תטהרו. יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל Magalo Ismahan Kariv Vimeru Amen Yehesh Meirav Amevorach Leolam Omei Omaya Yitbarach Yitbarach Vishtabach Vitpa'ar Vitramaham Yitnaseh Vitadar Vitale Vitalach Shemeduk Shabrichu Leila Leila Min Kol Berchata V'Shirata Tushbechata V'Nechemata Damiran Be'olma Vimeru Amen.
We recite the Amidah silently, pages 213 through 221. We're going to continue now at the bottom of page 226, Salach Lanu.
Selach lanu Avinu ki chatanu mechalanu malkeinu ki fashanu ki ata Adonai tov v'salach v'rav chesed v'rav chesed v'rav chesed lechol korecha.
Page 227, like clay in the hand of the potter, ki hine kachomer. We're going to do the first three and the last stanza on 227.
Ki hine kachomer beyad hayotzer bertzoto marchiv ubertzoto mekatzer kein anachnu beyad chesed notzer la brit habeit ve'al tefen la yetzer ki hine ka'even beyad hamesatet bertzoto chez ubertzoto mechatet kein anachnu beyadcha mechayeu motet la brit habeit ve'al tefen la yetzer ki hine kagarzen beyad hecharash bertzoto dibek laur ubertzoto perash kein anachnu beyadcha mechoni varash la brit habeit ve'al tefen la yetzer ki hine kakesef beyad hatzorev bertzoto mesagseg ubertzoto metzarev kein anachnu beyadcha mamsilim mazor teref la brit habeit ve'al tefen la yetzer.
Page 233, we rise, we open the ark briefly. If Jacqueline, if you go ahead and open that for Shema Kolenu.
Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Chuz v'rachem aleinu v'kabel berachamim uvratzon et tefilat Hashim Beinu Adonai Eile
turn to page 234. Because we're jumping around a little bit, we're going to stay standing because almost all the things that we're doing require standing. So this is Ki anu amecha. We are your people, you are our God.
Eloheinu, Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu. Ki anu amecha ve'ata Eloheinu, anu anecha ve'ata v'inu anu avadecha ve'ata doreinu, anu kehalecha ve'ata chelkeinu, anu nachalatecha ve'ata goraleinu, anu sonecha ve'ata roeinu, anu charnecha ve'ata nododreinu, anu peulatecha ve'ata yotzreinu, anu rayatecha ve'ata dodeinu, anu segulatecha ve'ata keroveinu, anu amecha ve'ata malkeinu, anu mamilecha ve'ata mamileinu, anu azefanim ve'ata rachum v'chanun, anu kasher orev ve'ata erech apayim, anu malei avon ve'ata malei rachamim, anu yameinu ketzel over ve'ata hu shnotecha lo yitamu. Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, tavo lefanecha tfilatenu ve'atita laha mitchinatenu, shein anachnu azefanim ukshei oref, lomar lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu, tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu, aval anachnu v'avotenu chatanu.
We take our fist and gently beat it into our hearts with each of the acrostic transgressions missing the mark.
Ashamnu, Agadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Dofi, Hevinu, Behir Shanu, Zadnu, Chamasnu, Tafalnu Sheker, Yahatznu Kizavnu, Latznu, Maradnu, Niatznu, Sararnu, Avinu, Hashanu, Sararnu, Kishinu Oref, Rashanu, Shichatnu, Tiavnu, Tainu, Titanu, Sarnu b'mitzvotecha u'mishpatecha tovim v'lo shava lanu, v'ata sadik al kol abaleinu,
page 237. We're going to do the first stanza in Hebrew, the second stanza in English, responsively, and then the third stanza back in Hebrew, the Al Chet.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך באונס וברצון.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך באימוץ הלב.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בבלי דעת.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בביטוי שפתיים.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בגילוי עריות.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בגלוי ובסתר.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בדעת ובמרמה.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בדיבור פה.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בהונאת פריאה.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בהרחור הלב.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בבעידת צנות.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בווידוי פה.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בזלזול מרים ומורים.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בזדון ובשגגה.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בחוזק יד.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בחילול השם.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בטומאת שפתיים.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בטיפשות פה.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך ביצר הרע.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך ביודעים ובלא יודעים.
ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחלנו, כפר לנו. ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחלנו, סלח לנו מחלנו, כפר לנו.
We've sinned against you through denial and deceit.
We have sinned against you by taking wrong,
We've sinned against you by clever cynicism.
and we have sinned against you by speaking ill of others.
We've sinned against you by the way we do business.
We have sinned against you through eating and drinking.
We have sinned against you by greed and oppressive interest.
We have sinned against you through arrogance.
We have sinned against you in everyday conversation.
And we have sinned against you through conspiratorial glances.
We have sinned against you through condescension.
Sinned against you through stubbornness. The Al Kulam Eloha Selichot, Selach lanu mechalanu, kaper lanu. Al Kulam Eloha Selichot, Selach lanu mechalanu, Selach lanu mechalanu, kaper lanu.
Back to the Hebrew.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בפריקתו.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בפלילות.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בצדיעת ריאה.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בצרות עין.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בקלות ראש.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בקשיות עורף.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בריצת רגליים להרע.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בשבועת שווא.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בשנאת חינם.
על חטא שחטאנו לפניך בתשומת יד.
ועל חטא שחטאנו לפניך בתימהון לבב.
ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחלנו, כפר לנו. על כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחלנו, סלח לנו מחלנו, כפר לנו.
We turn now to Avinu Malkeinu, and we're going to invite Leah Edelstein is going to sing the Max Janowski version. Then Chazan El will finish with the refrain that you know. Jacqueline, if you want to go ahead and open the ark.
Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Koleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu Lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu, Chamol Aleinu Ve'aleinu. V'tapeinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Kale Dever, V'cherev V'rav Me'aleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Kale Chotzar U'mastin Me'aleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Kodveinu b'sefer Chaim Tovim. Avinu Malkeinu, Chadesh Aleinu, Chadesh Aleinu, Shana Tova. Shema Koleinu, Shema Koleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chadesh Aleinu, Shana Tova. Avinu Malkeinu, Chadesh Aleinu, Chadesh Aleinu, Shana Tova. Shema Koleinu, Shema Koleinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu v'Haneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu v'Haneinu, Ki ein banu ma'asim. Aseh imanu, tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh imanu, tzedaka v'chesed, v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu v'Haneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu v'Haneinu, Ki ein banu ma'asim. Aseh imanu, tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh
Imanu tzedaka v'chesed
v'hoshienu.
I would say that you would normally close the ark, but we're going to turn to the Yizkor service now on page 290, 91. We're going to do an abbreviated version tonight, but we know that many of you come just for Yizkor, and so that's why we're attaching it to every one of our services. I'd like to call upon Joan Rubin and Joel Goldberg to come up and hold Sifrei Torah. Each of them has recent loss in their lives. And I was actually discussing this with Joan, and it's no honor to have lost someone recently, of course, but in a way, as you holding the Torah is holding you up as well. And we are certainly with both of you. There's actually an addition to the Yizkor book. Joel's mother, Eleanor Goldberg, should be in there as well in recent years. I mean, in recent months. She passed away this past February. And why don't you just go ahead and sing Shviti on the bottom of 290, and then I'll continue.
Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini bal hemod lachen samach libi veyagel kevodi af besari yishkol levetach.
On 291 now, we go ahead and read all the blessings that apply to us, all the personal Yizkor prayers of the people we are remembering. We say that to ourselves. On page 292, going to chant the El Maleh Rachamim, first for the 6 million who perished in the Holocaust, and then on the next page for all who perished.
El Maleh Rachamim shochen bamromim המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר רקיע מזהירים לנשמות כל אחינו בני ישראל שנטבחו בשואה אנשים ונשים וטף שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם אנא בעל רחמים הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור חיים את נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן. El Maleh Rachamim shochen במרומים המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר רקיע מזהירים לנשמות כל אלה שהזכרנו היום לברכה שהלכו בעולמם tehi menuchatam. Ana barachamim, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור חיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וננוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, whose radiance is like the heavens, to the souls of all those we have recalled today. May their memory be a blessing, and may they rest in paradise. Master of mercy, may they find eternal shelter beneath the shadow of your wings. May their soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. Adonai is their portion. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You can actually put the Torah, the Sifrei Torahs, back into the ark as we finish the Yizkor service. I want to especially remember those beloved members and relatives who have passed away during this past year. Dina Aronson, and actually just this week, Steve Glazer's mom as well. That's his wife, John Myers Alswang, Simi Baum, Francis Block, Lubin Calabio, Jack Coulter, Edith Denenberg, Sally Disco, Eleanor Goldberg, Helen Golden, Alan Green, Samuel Jackson, Larry Kaufman, Erwin Kanan, Edna Levine, Pablo Macias, Brenda Hillary Maltz, Judy Maslia, Sadok Maslia, Sid Rose, Ellen Rubin, Aviva Rachel Shotland, Lou Shotland, Charles Sims, Gloria Sims, Andy Simonoff, Marvin Spielman. We join together in the Mourner's Kaddish on 294. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach hirutei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'galav v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam almei almaya yit barach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemei dekudsha barichu la'ela la'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata Damiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehesh lama rabba min shemaya v'chayim alenu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav huya aseh shalom alenu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all of you who are remembering your beloved tonight. And let us say, Amen. I should have done the Kaddish Shalem before Yizkor. Instead, we're going to do it after. So we have one more Kaddish before I'll let you be seated. It's on 245, Kaddish Shalem.
Yikara v'yikara shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, b'galav v'zman kariv v'yimeru Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach, le'olam olmei olmaya yitbarach. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudesha le'ela le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiram be'alma v'yimeru
Amen.
tikabel slotonu v'tohon dechol Yisrael kadamu v'hondi v'shmaya v'yimeru
Amen.
Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'imromav huyaseh shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru.
Amen. Please be seated. You can close your books for a few minutes, and actually maybe more than a few tonight. So first they came for the immigrants, and I stood up because families belong together. Then they came for the African Americans, and I stood up because Black Lives Matter. Then they came for the LGBTQ community, and I stood up because love is love. Then they came for the Asian Americans, and I stood up because stop Asian hate. And then they came for me, and I stood alone because I'm a Jew. I don't know how many of you saw that meme that went around the internet back in May and June when there was a significant increase in anti-Semitism in the world and in this country at the height of the most recent conflict between Israel and Hamas. I don't know how many of you saw of it or how many felt as I did, but I felt very, very alone. I was saddened and honestly terrified by the silence of the world and even of my friends. And I remember one of those Shabbats, the Torah portion, the Parsha, was Balak. That's the portion where the prophet Balaam famously looks over at the Israelite people and says, Ma tovu halecha Yaakov, how good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling place is Israel. But this year I was struck by a very different line that I'd never really paid attention to before. This year I was struck by the line where he says, from the heights I gaze upon them, this is a people who dwell alone. Am levavad yishkon. A people who dwell alone, and yishkon is actually in the future tense there, so will dwell alone. So continuing the theme of the journey, tonight we're going to go to a dark part of our journey, a dark path along the life journey of the Jewish people. Because tonight I'm going to be talking about anti-Semitism. I suppose because it's Israel-related, you'd have to call it left-wing anti-Semitism, but the thing about anti-Semitism is it kind of defies traditional left and right-wing categories because the extremes kind of meet in the middle. And although I was taught in rabbinical school that I should never apologize for words that I feel passionately about, I do apologize if you heard almost the same sermon back in May and June, or if you heard a similar sermon 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. Because unfortunately, anti-Semitism is not something that goes away, and it's a topic that I feel like I need to talk about, I need to address as a rabbi every so often, especially when it significantly increases as it did this past year. I would love to be the ostrich that buries my head in the sand, but I can't. I feel like it really is my rabbinic obligation, even if all I'm doing is just documenting the increase in anti-Semitism over the years that I've been here. So we're going to be discussing anti-Semitism. As I mentioned, I felt very alone. I was depressed. I didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to come into work. And at least one member of the congregation said afterward, I could see how much pain you were in your face, and my mask covered almost my entire face. So I was wondering at the time, is there anywhere to go for solace, comfort? Well, I couldn't go to the news. When it comes to coverage of Israel and the Palestinian conflict, I don't expect it to be unbiased. And that's not because the press is anti-Semitic at its core. It's maybe in some places, but really that's not it. There's a very different power dynamic. When Israel and the Palestinians are involved, the power dynamics are different. Israel has the power, and more Palestinians die than Israelis die. That is simply just a fact, and it's going to be covered that way. But it somehow just seemed a little bit different this time. Words like colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide were thrown around loosely. And they were rarely challenged by the interviewer. And I heard and read a lot of the phrase killing children, Israel as child killers, which reminded me not so subtly of a blood libel that's been happening for 2,000 years. Now, from the Israeli perspective, none of it made sense. They didn't understand why they got no sympathy. In the mainstream Israeli view, they were operating a defensive war, defensive action, trying their best to minimize civilian deaths, while at the same time, their civilian population had bombs being rained upon them, so many that the Iron Dome couldn't stop them this time, coming from a place, Gaza, that they don't occupy, that they left in 2007, done by a terrorist organization, Hamas, who openly states that they want to destroy Israel. And if you read their charter, it's a lot worse than that. It actually talks about killing Jews, even if they're hiding behind trees. But we know that increasingly that's not how the world sees it, and increasingly that's not even how most of the American Jewish community sees it. I couldn't go to the entertainment world to escape, not with comedians like John Oliver talking about war crimes on his comedy show, or with seemingly every celebrity in America having to post on Instagram or tweet out their own anti-Israel screeds. There was very rarely a tweet or a post about peace. In fact, if you did that, you were essentially ridiculed, even canceled. And they meant well, I suppose, right? They were doing it in the name of what they thought was justice, but really they bordered and sometimes crossed right over the border into anti-Semitism. And your kids and my kids had to read about it all the time because they were reposted and retweeted by all their friends. And their friends and the celebrities know nothing, for the most part, about the Israeli-Palestinian situation. They know nothing about the nuances. They kept using those same extremist terms, colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide. It would take me a separate lecture to explain why none of those apply, but I do want to mention genocide just for a moment. A lot of the celebrities even called their own, I guess, fellow celebrity, Israeli celebrity, Gal Gadot, genocidal Barbie, because, of course, she served in the Israeli Defense Forces. Genocide is what the Nazis tried to do to the Jews. Genocide is what the Turks tried to do to the Armenians. Genocide is what happened in former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Genocide is not when a population increases from 1 to 4 million since the 1960s. Okay, that is not genocide. But this kind of anti-Semitism does not care about nuance. Am levavad yishkon, we are a people who dwell alone. I couldn't go to the usual progressive allies who normally we seek common cause with, but in this case, there were so many of these organizations, nothing to do with Israel, any of these organizations, nothing to say about human rights violations anywhere in the world, but they too had to take a firmly anti-Israel stand, not a pro-peace stand, just an anti-Israel stand. Organizations like the Chicago Dyke March, or various teachers' unions, or the Berkeley Rent Stabilization Board, or the Society for Children's Authors and Illustrators. I bet you don't even know, very few of you probably know about this one. This one is particularly bizarre. This organization has a diversity and inclusion officer who is, or rather was, a black Jewish woman. And when anti-Semitism was on the increase, she sent out a message decrying anti-Semitism and asking for peace and calm. But because they viewed her as taking sides in the conflict, even though it was not about Israel, because it didn't mention Islamophobia, she was forced to resign. Similar situation occurred with the president of Rutgers University. Rutgers has a significant Jewish population, both student and faculty. The president of Rutgers was very worried about the safety of the Jewish community on the campus. He sent out a letter to the community decrying the increase in anti-Semitism. But again, because he was said to be picking sides, and again, this was not about Israel, his letter, because he didn't mention other marginalized groups, he had to send out an apology letter 2 days later. And then, of course, it got worse at Rutgers. The Student Activities Commission has succeeded in defunding Hillel because Hillel has a connection to Israel, even though it's a very diverse connection. No student activity money will go to Hillel there. You don't have to worry about the Hillel. They have outside funding, all right? That's not who funds it, but just the idea. It also happened at Pomona College in California, and I promise it's coming to a campus near you. And you can try to explain about the difference between occupied land and not occupied land, and the difference between the 1948 borders and the 1967 borders, and how there wasn't a Palestinian state when Jordan had control of it either. And you can try to talk about the fact that that Israel at least 3 times offered peace, giving up 97% of the West Bank. You can talk about the tech advances and the medical advances and the idea that they have now the most diverse government in their history. But nobody cares, because this kind of anti-Semitism has no room for nuance. Am levavad yishkon. We are a people who dwell alone. I would have loved to have gone to my interfaith colleagues, and I tried, but my phone calls and emails were not returned. Maybe it's because they're too busy. Maybe they just don't want to get involved and stick themselves in the middle, and I can fully understand that. But it was much worse than that. It wasn't just a silence. There were several who were simply fanning the flames. Part of an email list of something 90-odd interfaith folks, clergy and others who are involved in interfaith issues. And some of the letters that went out, and then the support for those letters, I mean, they really made me sick to my stomach. There was one that I remember very clearly that talked about how it's not a conflict. Don't call it a conflict. It's Israel's apartheid and ethnic cleansing. It's not a conflict. And anyone who doesn't take a specifically anti-Israel stand has actual blood on their hands. Those were the words, actual blood on their hands. I tried to reach out to the head of the organization, did not return my email or phone call. I thought, what do I do when I'm seeing these letters? Do I respond and try to clarify things and talk about the nuance and the complexity, the conflict to the group? And in the end, I chickened out. Because these kinds of email dialogues, internet back and forth, don't generally yield light. They generally just yield more flames. And some of the efforts to reach out to individuals were also just ignored. Again, this kind of anti-Semitism does not really consider nuance. I really felt like part of an Am levavad yishkon, a people dwelling alone. I couldn't even turn to the freezer for comfort, because now Ben & Jerry's was part of the boycott of Israel, or at least part of Israel. And it's more complicated than you think. I can't get into it, it'll take me too long, but one of the reasons that they responded this way is because of social media comments on their sites. Comments like, eating Ben & Jerry's ice cream feels like eating the blood of Palestinian children. I mean, just vile, horrible stuff. But again, this kind of anti-Semitism has no room for nuance. Am levavad yishkon, we are a people who dwell alone. Now, I imagine at least some of you are saying to yourselves, these are not necessarily examples of anti-Semitism. This is just anti-Zionism, or maybe just legitimate criticism of Israel. Can you not criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semite? Do you agree with every action the Israeli government takes? Of course not. But of course I don't agree with every action the Israeli government takes. And of course you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic, even though a lot of that criticism often does involve demonization and delegitimization and double standards. And I feel like if you're doing it, you're kind of piling on, okay? It's not as if it isn't happening like everywhere. But On the other hand, and I'm going to do a couple of tevias here, a couple of on the other hands right now. It's taken me a long time to truly understand that even the harshest anti-Israel rhetoric, some of it is legitimate criticism, and there's lots to be criticized. Some of it is just brutal anti-Israel rhetoric, and many actually don't believe that the state of Israel should exist. But even some of that, it does not come from an anti-Semitic place. It's hard not to see it that way, but it really doesn't. Often, the intentions are actually very good. And they're coming increasingly from ourselves, from the American Jewish community. There was a recent survey that says something like a third of American Jews under 30 actually don't believe Israel should exist as a state. A third of Jews under 30. I found that, very disturbing, of course. These Jews anti-Semitic, they're not, many of them are not ignorant. They've been to Israel. Their Jewish identity is important to them. Israel's not important to them, but their Jewish identity is. They just have a very different perspective. Do I agree with that perspective? Of course not. I find it dangerously naive. But we can't just write them off, right? We're going to have to learn to live together in community, as frightening as that prospect is to me personally. But on the other hand, there's a reason for the expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. If you didn't understand that anti-Israel rhetoric actually leads to anti-Semitic action, you should have learned it from this conflict. There was a 400% increase in anti-Semitic acts. It was bad enough having to read the stuff on Twitter and Instagram. But I'm talking actions, I'm talking vandalism, I'm talking violence. We're talking about gravestones overturned. We're talking about graffiti, sometimes which said Free Palestine, sometimes which said death to Jews. On Hillel houses, Jewish fraternities, preschools in Noe Valley in San Francisco, Manny's Cafe in San Francisco. For God's sake, there were people literally being beaten up in the streets in New York and Los Angeles for being Jewish. And you know what? Nobody asked those Jews if they were Zionist or anti-Zionist. Nobody asked those Jews if they supported the Netanyahu government or the Bennett government or any other government. Nobody asked those Jews how they felt about Israel. This kind of anti-Semitism does not understand nuance. Am levavad yishkon. We are a people who dwell alone. And I have another on the other hand, which is to say that while Israel may not be an important part of lots of American Jews' identity, including many of yours, to say that it's not an important part of Judaism, I believe, is simply to ignore Jewish teachings. Now, first of all, there's our historical connection, that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel because that's where we came together as a people. We long to get back there for 2,000 years, and I still think it's the only safe place that Jews can go when something goes awry, as it has in many countries, or if some kind of global anti-Semitic Holocaust-like event were to take place. And I know most of you don't believe that could happen, or maybe now you maybe see how it possibly could, although I don't think we're anywhere near there. There's that historical connection. I'm talking about something more basic than that even. First of all, you know what you say at the end of every Passover Seder, right? You say, next year in Jerusalem. We actually end Yom Kippur with that too. L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, right after the shofar blow. Next year in Jerusalem. But it actually comes also, Israel and Zion and Jerusalem are mentioned at the most important events in Jewish life. There was a weekend during the conflict where I conducted both a wedding and a funeral. Most of the audiences at that wedding and funeral were not Jewish. You know how a Jewish wedding ends? Well, if you if you think about if you consider the ending to be the Sheva Brachot, the 7 blessings, the 7th blessing talks about how we're rejoicing in the streets of Jerusalem and in the cities of Judah because a Jewish couple's getting married. And then, at an Orthodox ceremony, when the groom stomps on the glass, he says, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, if I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its ability to even function. You know how a Jewish funeral ends? We form 2 rows, and the direct mourners walk through the rows, and you know what you say to those people? You say, may God console you with all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We also say it L'cha Dodi every Friday night. That's Zionism. And I remember thinking at this wedding and this funeral, what are these people going to think? We're at the height of the conflict. I'm about to mention Jerusalem and Zion. Am I going to have to change the liturgy here? Now, I never would have, but that the thought occurred to me really blew my mind. Of course, I immediately thought, you know, even if I offend people here, they'll come to see that Jerusalem and Israel are really central to Judaism and the Jewish people. So if you were coming for comfort tonight to Kol Nidre, I didn't give it to you. And, you know, when I speak about anti-Semitism, there will be those who ask me, did you have to do it on one of the holiest nights of the year? And Davka, yes, because it's that important. And that's why I do it on Yom Kippur. But that's also why I do it on Yom Kippur evening, because that's not what I want to leave you with. Because tomorrow, I promise we're going to step out of the shadows and step back into the light. But even on the dark path that we traveled tonight, there are lanterns that light the way. There are organizations like the ADL and the American Jewish Committee, both worthy of your donations, who are documenting these things and educating people. There are organizations like Zionists, Jewish Women's Organization, which spends time at protests and on the internet, refusing to cede the public square to Israel haters. There are my friends Duma Sani and Joshua Washington, who established the IBSI, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, and they spend time on college campuses educating people, and they're recruiting ministers for trips to Israel. If you know one, let me know that you think might be interested in going. They actually have to be African American because this is specifically for black ministers, but if you know one, let me know. I will pass that information on. And there's my own family. My wife, Karen, and my sons, Micah and Jonah, are much more courageous than I am with this stuff. Karen's a part of every anti-racism organization that exists in her school district, mostly to fight racism, but also to make sure that those organizations don't become the next Berkeley Rent Stabilization Board and stay in their lane. My son Micah has been one of the student leaders for all 4 years on his campus, The Ohio State University, fighting boycotts of Israel. And Jonah, in his senior year of high school, at the height of this conflict, when he would see these posts from acquaintances and friends on Instagram, he would swipe on them, and he would basically say, can we talk about this? And he would actually try to explain different perspectives, opening minds one at a time. I'm very proud of them. And they're much, like I said, much more courageous than I am. So all these organizations and my family members, they give us hope. And so does the history of the resilience of the Jewish people. And on a real gut faith level, that Hashem, that God has been there for us, even when times were darkest. Because we also say in the Passover Haggadah, V'him she'amda, God and the Torah have stood by us, even when more than one enemy has come to destroy the people Israel. The Holy One, blessed be God, delivers us. V'hi she'amda lavotenu, V'hi she'amda Lavotenu velanu. Velo echad bilvad. Amad aleinu, amad aleinu. Amad aleinu v'chalotenu. V'kadosh baruch hu matzilenu. Matzilenu mi Adam. Yai nai nai nai. Yai nai 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 nai. The Holy One, blessed be God, has always delivered us. Tomorrow, we'll step back into the light. Until then, Tzom Kol, have an easy fast, and Gamar Chatima Tova. All right, our service now continues with the Aleinu. Please rise, page 246.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol l'atei kedula le'yotzer b'reishit shelo asanu k'goyei haratzot v'lo hasamanu k'mishpechot hadama shelo sam chalkenu kahem v'gohor aleinu kechol hamonam v'anachnu korim Umishtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu noter shamayim ve'osed haaretz umoshav yekaro bashamayim imal ushchinatu zo begavhei meromim Hu Eloheinu Einod Emet Malkeinu Afazulato Kakadu Betorato Liadata Yom Vehashavota Elevavecha Ki Adonai Hu Elohim Bashamayim Imal Ve'al haaretz mitachat einod Kakativ b'toratecha Adonai yimlach le'olam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol haaretz Bayom hahu, Hi Adonai echad, Ushemo echad.
Mourners and those observing Yortzeit, as well as anyone who wishes to, remain standing. All others can be seated. Kaddish Yatom, Mourners Kaddish, page 247. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah v'yalmad yivrach Yerutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayechol Beit Yisrael b'galav v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam lo me'al maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shmei Kudsha b'richu le'ela le'ela mikol berchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata Damiran Be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael v'imru Oseh Shalom v'imrama Huyaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Zichronam Livracha. May the memory of the people you're thinking of tonight be a blessing to you always. May be seated. 248, Psalm 27.
Et panecha Adonai avakesh, Adonai avakesh. Et panecha Adonai avakesh, Et panecha Adonai avakesh, Adonai avakesh. את פניך אדוני אבקש. לך אמר ליבי בקשו פני, לך אמר ליבי בקשו פני, לך אמר ליבי בקשו פני, את פניך אבקש.
All right, before the closing song, which will be either Adon Olam or Yigdal, whichever Hazanit Yael chooses to do, a few announcements. So just about this time tomorrow night will be when we break the fast, actually. There's a little cloud, so I don't know if you can see the 3 stars, but this is pretty much it. It's sometime between 7:50 and 7:55, so that's what it will be tomorrow. We have children's services, family services at 8. Of course, you have to have already signed up for these things, but if you did, 8 a.m. I'm not sorry, 9 a.m. I wish it were 8, but we'll because of the heat. But tomorrow we're blessed with great weather. You might even need a jacket as you did tonight. So 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock are the regular adult Yom Kippur morning services. 2 o'clock will be the youth services with Susan Simon. Ne'ilah, well, actually the Mincha part merging into Ne'ilah will start at 5:30. There will be a study session at approximately 1 o'clock over Zoom with Rabbi Andrea Berlin. I want to thank Leah Edelstein for beautiful singing of Avinu Malkeinu tonight. Of course, Hazanit Yael Krieger for beautiful singing of everything, and especially Kol Nidre. I want to thank Josh Mailman, who is back making sure all this goes out to everybody, and really the whole operation, we could not do this without him. And of course, all our fabulous staff who have worked incredibly hard these last 2 weeks. Thank you so much to all of them. We will conclude with which one?
Let's try Adon Olam.
Adon Olam, page 249.
Adon Olam asher mahalav b'terem kol yetzir nivra lehet nasa b'chefso kol azai melech shemo nikra v'acharei kichlot hakol Levado yimloch nora, vehu haya, vehu hove, vehu yeh betifara, vehu echad ve'yein sheni, lehamshilo, lehachbira. Bli reshit beli tachlit v'lo ha'oz v'ha'misra v'hu eli v'chai go'ali v'tzur chavli v'yetzara v'hu nisi umanos li menakosi beyom ekra yato afkid ruchi v'yadishan v'yaira v'imruchi geviati Adonai li v'lo
Gamar Chatima Tova. Thank you for that extra special Behisha Amda version of Adon Olam. May you have an easy fast, some call, and we'll see you tomorrow. Some of you, at least online.